Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, who should pay for the new Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore? Maryland proposes holding back children who cannot read at the third grade level. Montgomery County's lagging economy again. And if not Biden, then who? Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by the Secretary of the Maryland Republican Central Committee, Mark Uncapher, and former County Council member and CEO of SkillSmart, Mike Knapp. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. As all of our audience knows, in the early morning hours of March 26th, the fully loaded cargo ship lost power as it was exiting the Port of Baltimore. It slammed into the Francis Scott Key Bridge spanning the Patapsco River, causing the bridge to collapse and fall into the river. Remarkably, there were only 6 fatalities from this tragic accident. It's also remarkable that in less than 5 months, the channel is mostly to the Baltimore harbor is mostly open to shipping. Mike, this week, Maryland Senators Chris Van Hollen and Ben Cardin urged a Senate panel to support full federal funding to replace the damaged bridge, a total of approximately $1.7 billion. Who should pay for the bridge to rebuild it?
Well, as I understand it, I think the $1.7 billion will be a significant contribution from the feds, but I think the state is going to have to put in money too. I've heard the number from some state sources as high as between $3 and $4 billion for the total cost of the replacement. So I think the solution is going to be both local, state, and federal ultimately at the end of the day. And I think that's probably where it ought to be. Clearly, the port has a significant national impact, and there are significant economic benefits for the port that clearly accrue to the rest of the country, but obviously it has significant impact here locally and regionally, and the state has an interest in making sure that works as well. So I think that I appreciate our senators putting that out there. I think the Fed should pony up as well, but I think it's going to be a combined effort ultimately to get this across the finish line.
Well, but Mark, the transportation modal is that the bridge services basically Baltimore City. So should the federal government be picking up the cost for this?
Well, I think what we have talked about in the past is that it would be great to see more of the money come from the insurance carriers for the boat owners that are responsible for that. That said, I guess their pockets are only so deep, or the litigation can only produce so much for it. And unfortunately, that will only be a proverbial drop in the bucket.
Well, but let's assume that the insurance companies are good. And I think the article that I sent around said that the insurance companies are good for about $700 million. Who should get that money? If Maryland is going to be putting in $3 million and the feds are putting in $1.7 million, who gets the insurance proceeds?
Well, presumably it's the Maryland Transportation Authority. Maybe I'm not following your.
Well, the suggestion that was, as it was proposed to the Commerce Committee in the Senate, was that the feds would get that money, not the state of Maryland.
I can't believe that that's not actually factored into what's there. So if we actually think we've already anticipated we're going to get the $700 million, I would assume that we've already factored in that the total cost is going to be greater, and that what we're asking the feds for is reflective of what we need from the feds, not that they should then get more money back to the feds.
Well, I think that's critical in determining whether we get federal funding and quote unquote full federal funding. Right. Which has been bandied about as you know, we have an infrastructure deficit here in Maryland. I mean, this is, adding another $3 billion to the deficit is a major task that the administration of Wes Moore has to juggle in the next 2 or 3 years, because everybody wants that bridge built as quickly as possible.
Well, and I think to your point, Casey, the notion that the bridge serves Baltimore City, it does, but it also serves the ability for that port to be viable. Many of the people who actually work at that port live on the other side of that bridge. And so the ability for that to be an ongoing economic entity that can support activity up and down the East Coast, I think points to why this is more than just a state of Maryland effort to bring to a successful conclusion.
Anything further to add, Mark?
Nope.
All right, well, let's go on to our next topic, which I find this topic, really intriguing. We all know that in the aftermath of the COVID shutdowns on our educational system, that a lot of students fell behind and they didn't get up to their grade level of education in reading and math. And so an interesting proposal was just made. But according to the National Center for Educational Statistics, the percentage of students in Maryland who performed at the basic level of the National Assessment for Educational Progress Test for fourth grade students was only 56% in reading. And this was in 2022. And they also went on to say that the percentage of students in Maryland who performed at or above the proficiency level was just 31%. So this week a proposal came out, a literacy policy, that would have third grade students possibly being held back for a year if they don't achieve certain reading scores and are basically reading at grade level. Now, if only 44% and 31% are at functional level, Mark, while this is a laudable goal to have all children be functional and literate and only 50% of the students can read at a basic level, I can't imagine that we're going to be able to hold back half of every class beginning each year.
Well, Casey, as a former MCPS parent, I got to tell you, this is a especially sore subject. Our kids were in one of the W districts. We were in the Whitman district and struggled with reading. And it was only after we paid for tutors, outside groups, Sylvan Learning, that they came up to speed on learning. And I will tell you, there's a cottage industry of tutors available throughout Montgomery County, but including in the areas that are, quote, the best performing school system. What's fascinating to me is the lessons that can be applied by those vendors that people pay out of pocket for ought to be able to be employed by MCPS, but apparently are not, because there's got clearly a market for that. So again, whether you hold back or not, that's the consequences. What we really want is for kids to get educated and brought up to speed on both math but also in reading as well.
Well, I mean, we can get into the deficiencies of the MCPS school system, whether their teaching protocols are correct. But this is really kind of a shocking, scenario. Mike, the Annie B. Casey Foundation noted that students who don't read proficiently by the end of third grade are 4 times more likely to leave school without a diploma. This gives them a tremendous disadvantage in the workplace. But, and it increases, the numbers increase if a student comes from a low-income family, if it's Black or Latino. You deal with this as a trustee for Montgomery College. What's the answer to this?
Well, so the answer, and I think Mark started to go down this road, is I think, one, there have to be consequences. And so I think when you look at what the state has proposed, I think that's part of it. But saying we're going to hold everyone back doesn't solve that problem. What you have to employ are different strategies to actually focus on how do we have children between pre-K and third grade actually learn to read more effectively. And so that's where that focus has to be. And this didn't just kind of drop from the sky. So the new superintendent for the state of Maryland, Dr. Carrie Wright, came from Mississippi, where she actually instituted a very similar plan to what was put out here, where they had amazingly tremendous outcomes. I know people don't generally think of good educational outcomes in the state of Mississippi, but if you go back and actually look at their reading outcomes, which is where this is generated from, she knows how to basically what they did, how they deployed it, and then how they got the outcomes to be where they were. And I think that's where this is getting there. And it's not just holding people back; it's actually really changing how we're teaching children to read. And that's where I get excited about us having this conversation.
Well, what I was fascinated by was that so many states have already adopted this proposal. I think 19 states had done so, and and then more were likely to sign on, it's really a sign that and a signal that the educational system needs to ramp up itself to meet the needs of our student population.
Well, and I think we need to acknowledge that we've been good for a long time. And I think one of the challenges when a system or a state have been good at something for a long time, you continue to assume that you're good. And the reality is that we're not where we once were. And so our challenge is now to really recognize that and redouble our efforts to figure out how we can get back to where we think we are.
Well, the other point, and Mark brought this up, in his response, is that even in the school districts, which are considered top notch, and there are students that are struggling. What happens in the school systems, the school districts that are not? Mm-hmm. I mean, this is a terribly complicated problem. That how do you solve this? I mean, this is a decades old problem.
Could I make the observation? I think the metrics are extremely important. My observation would be that the schools are very conscious of which students count against their quote score as a school, and when a student is with an IEP, that they necessarily don't always pay as much attention because it doesn't affect their numbers to a great deal. So clearly, the fact that attention scrutiny is being applied to which schools are performing and not performing makes a huge difference in the way the problem is tackled.
Well, it's kind of an exciting proposition that as long as there are real metrics involved, mm-hmm. and this isn't just we'll set up some false tests that that if a student can achieve a certain reading score, they get passed along. I mean, I think it's a little bit of a tough love situation, and nothing wrong with that. So when we come back from this short break, why does Montgomery County continually lag in creating a robust private sector economy? And if not Biden, then who? Stay tuned. Welcome back. In the 21 years that I've produced and hosted this program, there's always been one topic every year, every summer, that demonstrates in stark detail the business environment of Montgomery County. And it's an intractable problem. It's why does Montgomery County economy keep lagging its neighboring jurisdictions? And just to pour salt on the wounds, just yesterday, CNBC introduced its annual report card on states. And guess which state scored as the best state to do business in? Of course, it was Virginia, our neighbor across the river. And what's more distressing is that here in Maryland not only is in the middle of the pack, since 2023, we've lost points. We were ranked 22nd in 2023, and now we're 31st overall. And just a few highlights. Workforce, we got a D+. Cost of doing business, we got an F as cost of doing business. Our overall economy, D+. This is really terrible stuff. The only thing that we shined in was technology and innovation, and we have a good school system, an educational system, and access to capital. Mike, as a former member of the county council, this is a subject that, I'm sure you had to address this annually. Adam Pagnucco, who published statistics that showed over a 15-year period, Montgomery County lagged in every county and the District of Columbia in the creation of new business establishments. Why is this?
Because there's no focus on it. We don't think about it. We have a government and an economy that has been focused on people who work with and for the federal government. We don't have any elected officials who actually have a business background, and we haven't for some time. And as a result, we don't have an appreciation or an understanding or a continued focus on growing businesses. That's not what we think about. That's not what our policymakers think about. And so you can go to many other jurisdictions where, whether it's the chambers of commerce, your economic development authorities, their focus and emphasis on how do we continue to come up with new strategies to grow our economy, grow businesses, attract and retain new businesses. And we talk about it periodically, but we tend to see these types of surveys and dismiss them because, well, we're not really measuring ourselves against those jurisdictions. And the reality is, rather than accept and understand that we want to be competitive, we want to have a growing and thriving economy, and that's what's going to continue to have our county be successful. We tend to just assume that this is going to be okay. Our economy's never really had a dip because, we're all right, and we don't focus on it.
Well, Mark, I mean, it seems rather odd that every 2 or 3 years they come out with a new economic development committee or task force. But Adam Pagnucco, in his statistics, says Montgomery County's had almost no job growth since 2008.
Mm-hmm.
Could I say something heretical for Montgomery County? Maybe it's thrown out of the county and sent to Virginia or what have you. But when we've
At least you'll have a job when you get there.
Right. Well, there you go. So here's the thing. One of the things that we've talked about as an economic development for a long time has been bioscience. And it is certainly true that Montgomery County is a major center for that. And we've been very successful at that strategy. But what the numbers that Casey and obviously referenced and Adam produced, it makes the point is that's not enough. And that's a very narrow sector. It's a very important sector, but we need to not just pat ourselves on the back about bioscience, but to reflect the fact that there's a whole bunch of industries that are here in Washington area that produce jobs, that produce new businesses, that we're just kind of not going after.
Well, to your point, Mark, I think in the most recent survey I saw regarding the bioscience industry, we're ranked third behind Boston and I believe California in the San Francisco area. So we're not even top dog there. We're
certainly very competitive, particularly on the lab, and FDA and NIH supports a lot of that. When you look at the full value chain for bio, we're really more on the research side.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, Mike, to your point, there's got to be some attention paid there. I mean, we talk about the quality of life. Quality of life, is very good here in Montgomery County for most people, but not all. There's a lack of housing. The cost of living here is very expensive. I mean, we got an F. The state got an F in cost of living. So, we've got to be able to find a way to, you got to, I guess, it's called priming the pump. You need to prime the pump in order to produce a good quality of life. You need jobs, good paying jobs in order to get there. So I'm not sure if the message will occur. Maybe when we have the next election, and whether or not there are term limits for the current county executive, who seems to take umbrage at the fact that some people may not like him, or not. Maybe we'll see a new direction after the next election. In any event, we're going to go on to our final topic, and this is always the fun one. The last topic of the day. The political piranhas. They're swimming in Washington these days, and they're going after President Joe Biden, whose flawed debate 2 weeks ago with former President Donald Trump threw chum in the water. So staunch allies of the president, like Nancy Pelosi and James Clyburn, are subtly suggesting that Joe may have to go, while media cheerleaders Mika Brzezinski and Senator John Fetterman stand behind Mr. Biden in their support. So I'm going to go to you, Mark, because it's more fun to hear from the opposition. What do you make of President Biden's fate, twisting in the proverbial political winds?
Well, it's interesting. There are really two sets of issues. One, can he continue as president right now? And we have a 25th Amendment process that hasn't been triggered yet. And then the second one is his role as a candidate. And that it gets increasingly complicated because we're coming right down to the end of the nomination process where in order to get on the ballot, a decision's got to be made essentially within, depending on the state you're looking at, is I think as early as August 8th. The 25th Amendment envisions sort of a medical evaluation. I think it's appropriate for the cabinet to make a determination that an objective evaluation ought to be made. And while I appreciate that there's, some, it's going to be subjective, you're going to pick doctors and what have you. But I think that's probably the step that we ought to be taking right now.
So Mike's grimacing. I can see it. He just doesn't want to even talk about it. Mike,
no, I'm happy. I'm happy to talk of. I'm happy to
Kenny
talk.
Rogers saying you got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them.
I would love to
do.
If we're going to have to start doing medical examinations because we have candidates that misspeak, we should get them all lined up because Trump's been misspeaking for the last 8 years. We had a debate where arguably, I mean, I don't think it's a huge shock, honestly, that Biden was not necessarily as well-spoken as people would have wanted him to be. Quite honestly, Joe Biden has never been particularly well-spoken. Was it a good performance? It was not. But the person standing next to him lied numerous times and had many foibles of his own. And so I guess one of the challenges I have as a Democrat is we do this hand-wringing thing. We have a felon who's running on the other side of the ticket. And rather than worry about how we actually focus on that and focus on the fact that the economy is as strong as it is, that the investments we've made in this community, that the elements that Joe Biden has done as president, which are significant, rather than talk about that, we're going to wring our hands and we're going to, as opposed to double down, close the fences in. We're all going to be supportive of the person who we identified we're going to run for president, not dissimilar from, quite honestly, what the Republicans do. There have been a whole lot of situations that I think the Republicans could have all run away. And what do? We all come together, even though we have an amazingly flawed candidate on the Republican side of the party and the Republican side of the spectrum. And so I just kind of sit there and scratch my head as to what we're trying to do. I would, let's run against Trump. Let's not worry about whether or not Joe Biden, who's done a great job, misspoke or didn't speak as clearly as we would have liked him to.
So Mark, how do you respond to that?
Well, I mean, I think the reaction of the public answers the question, which was that the people have real concerns about where the president is now, and also where he'll be during the next 4 years were he to be reelected. And that issue was front and center. The challenge is that, it's hard to make what is in effect a medical judgment. I mean, we've heard doctors who try and diagnose, and of course they have to make the caveat, they do it through the newspaper, having never met somebody. Well, I'm not really encouraged with that. I think there's always going to be speculation and people are going to want to get their names in print. I'd feel more comfortable if you really had professionals who were independent make an evaluation and we could rely on that.
For both candidates. I think that would be great. I mean, we've got a narcissist, and I'm not sure actually what we're concerned about with President Biden right now, but I think we've had a lot of history that we can point to with former President Trump. And so if we're going to do medical evaluations, I think let's have that. That'll be an interesting thing for a new presidential criteria.
I think it's better when the old two bulls during the debate challenged each other to a golf match. I mean, how absurd are we getting? But I mean, the reality is, does it really matter if we're voting for President Biden or not? I mean, not many people think he's going to be able to serve the full 4 years. So isn't really a vote for Biden a vote for President Harris?
I think a vote for Biden is a vote for Biden.
All right, guys. Great discussion. We're, the beauty of it is, we're going to have an election in a couple of months, and we're going to let the voters decide. Keep the doctors and everybody else out of it. Stay tuned for Party Shots when we come back from the short break. And welcome back. Now with Party Shots, Mike Knapp.
Well, thanks, Casey. clearly the weather has been front and center for most of the country, and certainly here in the DC area for already much of this summer. And so one of the things I think that happens, especially when we've had the extremes that we have, is that people tend to start taking it for granted. And one of the things I think it's really important and just to encourage folks is, as the heat continues to be what it is, just to look out for your neighbors, look out for the folks in your community who just may not be paying attention or are working out in the environment, and just make sure that that they're hydrated, that they've got water, that you've got folks who are older who live nearby. Just check on them. This is a good time during this summer when we're seeing these kind of weather challenges, just to step outside yourself for a few minutes and look around and make sure that everybody else is doing okay.
Yep. Great thought, Mike. Great thought. Mark Uncapher, your parting shot.
Here's my novel proposal. I say that we ought to have debates between Harris, Vice President Harris, and Donald Trump, since maybe that's, we're going to have that's the choice on president. And to be fair, we don't know who the Trump vice president nominee will be, but let's do the same thing. Let them, whoever they are, have a debate with Joe Biden, and that way we have a fair comparison as to who the actual president may be during the next 4 years.
Well, that's a really intriguing proposal, Mark. I'm sure it's not going to go anywhere. But
well, I'm sure of that, but I just thought we should get that out there.
It's good to put flyers out there to discuss.
We got to close, but I would love it if we could take a bet on whether there's going to be a second Trump Biden debate. My bet is no. Anyway, I want to thank you both for appearing this week. I want to thank the audience for tuning in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.